There are moments in life so wrong that time seems to slow down, where every person in the room stops breathing at exactly the same second. I witnessed one of those moments, and I have never forgotten it. His name was Daniel Archer, 32 years old. Sharp suit, sharper jaw. The kind of man who had carefully constructed every detail of his life to look a certain way. And on that afternoon, his wedding day, he was standing near the entrance of the Grand Belmont Hotel when his mother walked through the door. She was late by about 20 minutes. She came in quietly, the way she probably did everything. Plain cotton dress, worn shoes, a handbag that had seen better decades. She looked around the room with wide eyes, taking it all in, and she was smiling. She was proud of him. Daniel saw her from across the lobby, and something in his face, something I caught before he had time to hide it, shifted. It wasn't love, it wasn't relief. It was the expression of a man who had just seen his past show up somewhere it wasn't invited. Let me paint you a picture of what that room looked like. Crystal chandeliers that caught the light like frozen waterfalls. White roses flown in from Ecuador, arranged in towers that reached toward a ceiling painted with gold. A string quartet tucked into the corner, playing something elegant that floated through the air like it belonged there. 400 guests. Every single one of them dressed in a way that said, "I have never worried about money a day in my life." Daniel had married into this world as much as he'd built his way into it. His bride, Cassandra, was extraordinary. Her gown hand-sewn by a designer whose name I can't afford to say. Her family had flown people in from London, Dubai, and Sao Paulo just to watch her walk down the aisle. Her father, Richard, sat at the head table, silver-haired, still, the kind of quiet that doesn't need to announce itself. And then there was Margaret, standing just inside those enormous golden doors, clutching her old handbag with both hands. In a room designed to impress, she looked like a word spelled wrong. Everyone could see it. Everyone pretended not to notice, except Daniel. He noticed. He noticed everything. He crossed the room toward her. For one brief second, one impossible, hopeful second, I thought he was going to embrace her. He stopped 2 feet away. "You weren't supposed to come," he said. His voice was low, but not low enough. Margaret blinked. "Daniel, I'm your mother." "I know who you are." He didn't look away from her, didn't flinch. "But this isn't the place for you. You're going to embarrass me in front of people I can't afford to embarrass." She opened her mouth, closed it. He had already turned toward the nearest security guard, a tall man near the entrance, and given him a single nod. "Please escort my guest out. She won't be staying." Guest. Not mother. Not even her. Guest. The word landed in the room like something dropped from a height. A few heads turned, then a few more. And then the string quartet, I will never understand how they sensed it, simply stopped playing. The silence that followed was enormous. Margaret stood there in the middle of it, still holding her handbag, still looking at her son, like she was waiting for him to realize what he'd just said. He didn't. 400 people, and not one of them said a word out loud. But the whispers, those urgent, uncomfortable whispers that pass between people when something terrible happens in a beautiful place, those began almost immediately. "Is that his mother?" "I think so, yes." "Why is she... Did he just..." A woman at the table nearest to me pressed her fingers over her lips. Her husband reached over and touched her arm without looking at her, like he needed something to hold on to. Cassandra had gone very still near the floral arch where the ceremony was meant to begin. She was watching Daniel with an expression I couldn't fully decode. Not shock exactly, more like someone who has just heard a sentence and isn't sure yet what language it was spoken in. Her father, Richard, said nothing. He simply turned his glass slowly on the tablecloth once and watched. Daniel's business partner, a man I recognized, someone who'd given a toast at the rehearsal dinner the night before, leaned toward his wife and said something. She shook her head and looked away, and Daniel stood in the center of all of it, shoulders straight, jaw tight, already looking past his mother toward the rest of the room, like the matter was settled. This is the part that I think about most. Margaret didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice, didn't grab his sleeve, didn't cry, not visibly, not then. She simply looked at him for a long moment, long enough to be uncomfortable, long enough that a few guests looked away because watching it felt too much like witnessing something private. Then she nodded, once, and she began to walk toward the door, slowly, steadily, with her chin level and her back straight. There was a dignity in it that made no sense to me at the time. When someone humiliates you, when the person you raised looks at you like an inconvenience in front of 400 people, you should fall apart, shouldn't you? You should cry or argue or demand an explanation. But Margaret walked like a woman who had made peace with something a long time ago. And that calm, that unnatural, heartbreaking calm, was the most disturbing thing I'd seen all afternoon. Because it didn't look like surrender. It looked like a woman who already knew how this story ended. Near the back of the room, a small woman in her late 60s had her hand pressed flat against her chest like she was trying to hold something in. Her name was Gloria. I learned this later. She had known Margaret for over 30 years. She started talking to the woman beside her in a low, fractured voice, pulling up memories like they were heavy things. She said Margaret had worked 3 jobs when Daniel was in secondary school. Hospital cleaning in the mornings, grocery cashier in the evenings. Alterations, hand sewing other people's clothes at the kitchen table on weekends, because she couldn't afford a sewing room, let alone a sewing machine worth having. She said Margaret had worn the same winter coat for 11 years, that the lining had torn out long before she stopped wearing it. She said Daniel had won a partial scholarship to university. Partial. Gloria's voice dropped. She sold things. Everything she could. And there was one thing. She stopped, pressed her lips together. She told me she'd never tell him. She made me promise not to either. Why? The woman beside her asked. Because she wanted him to believe in himself, Gloria said. She thought if he knew how much it cost her, he'd carry the guilt. And she didn't want him carrying anything heavy. She looked toward the door Margaret had nearly reached. She just wanted him to fly. Margaret was 3 steps from the exit. The security guard had already relaxed, stepping back, assuming it was over. Then she stopped, completely still, and she turned around, not frantically, not dramatically. She simply turned, the way you turn when you've forgotten something small, like a name, like a word you meant to say. She looked at Daniel across the full length of that grand room. "Daniel," she said. Her voice carried. It shouldn't have. She wasn't speaking loudly. But the room was so quiet by then that a whisper would have reached the back wall. He looked at her. "I'll go," she said. "I won't embarrass you." "I promise you, I never will." She reached into her handbag, the worn, old handbag, and took out a folded piece of paper. She walked to the nearest table, the guest sign-in table just inside the entrance, and she set it down. Smoothed it flat with her palm once, carefully. Then she looked up at him one last time. "I just thought," she said quietly, "that you might want to know where your education came from." And she walked out. The door closed behind her without a sound. No one moved. Then Cassandra crossed the room, picked up the paper from the table, and unfolded it. I watched her face as she read. I want you to understand, Cassandra was composed, trained by a life of decorum and expectation to keep her expression neutral in public. She had probably never cried at a dinner table in her life, but her face, as she read that paper, came completely undone. She handed it to Daniel without a word. It was a bank statement, old and slightly yellowed, dated from the first year Daniel had attended university. Clipped to it, with a paperclip gone orange with rust, was a pawn shop receipt. Item sold, 1 gold necklace, antique, high sentimental value. In Margaret's handwriting, at the bottom, in small, careful letters, Mama's last piece. Forgive me, Mama, but he needed it more than I needed to keep it. The amount she received? $840. Behind that receipt, another, and another. 7 more spread across 4 years. A winter coat never replaced. Dental appointments canceled and never rescheduled. A medical bill paid in installments of $40 a month for 2 years, listed under a column she had labeled, in that same careful handwriting, "Worth it." And on the final page, dated 3 weeks earlier, a letter, addressed to Daniel, never sent. "I never told you any of this because I didn't want you to feel like you owed me something. You don't. You never did. I did it because watching you become who you are was the only thing I ever wanted. Please be happy, Daniel. That was always the whole point." She had written it after receiving his wedding invitation. Daniel stood there holding those pages, and the room watched him understand. Not quickly, not cleanly. The way understanding comes when the truth is something you can't absorb all at once. It arrived in pieces. His expression changed and then changed again, like a man trying to find solid ground and finding none. The pawn receipt. His grandmother's necklace. $840. Worth it. Gloria was crying openly now, not bothering to hide it. The woman beside her had both hands over her face. Cassandra had taken one step back from Daniel. Just one. But it was visible. His business partner, the man who'd given the rehearsal toast, pushed back his chair and stood up. He didn't say anything. He just stood there, as if sitting felt inappropriate. Someone near the back of the room, a voice I couldn't place, said softly, "She sold her mother's necklace. For him." It wasn't said with judgment. It was said with the kind of awe people reserve for things they can barely comprehend. Daniel's hands were shaking. The papers rattled slightly. He didn't seem to notice. 400 people sat in the most expensive room most of them had ever been in and felt, collectively, like they were somewhere very small. Richard stood up. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He buttoned the middle button of his jacket, slowly, deliberately, and walked toward Daniel. The room parted around him without being asked. He stopped in front of his daughter's groom, looked at him for a moment. Then he held out his hand. Daniel, still dazed, shook it. "My father worked in a steel factory for 31 years, Richard said. "My mother cleaned offices 4 nights a week until she was 67. I have spent my entire life making sure people like them are never made to feel small." He held Daniel's gaze. "I will not give my daughter to a man who is ashamed of where he came from, or ashamed of the woman who gave everything she had so he could stand in a room like this." He released Daniel's hand. "This wedding is postponed." Not canceled, postponed. That single word, the careful cruelty of it, left more space for consequence than a cancellation ever could. Cassandra didn't cry. She gathered the front of her gown, walked to the entrance door, and pushed it open. Margaret was sitting on a bench in the parking lot, alone, her old handbag on her lap, looking up at the sky like she was searching for something patient and permanent in it. Cassandra sat down beside her. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then, he didn't know, did he? About the necklace, about any of it. Margaret was quiet for a moment. "No. Why didn't you tell him?" She thought about this, really thought about it. "Because I wanted him to believe he did it himself," she finally said. "I wanted him to feel capable, strong, like nothing was ever too big for him. And he is. He is all of those things." Cassandra looked at her. "Even today?" Margaret didn't answer right away. She watched a bird cross the sky above the parking lot, small and unhurried. "He forgot," she said, "but forgetting isn't the same as being lost." Behind them, the hotel doors opened. Daniel stepped out. He wasn't wearing his jacket anymore, just the white shirt open at the collar. His eyes found his mother on that bench, and he stopped walking. He stood there. And Margaret looked at him, really looked at him, the way she probably had the day he was born, like he was the most complicated, most precious, most exhausting miracle she'd ever seen. She patted the bench beside her. He walked over. He sat down. He didn't say anything for a long time, and when he finally spoke, His voice was barely there at all. "Grandma's necklace," he said. She said. "Mom, I know," she said. "I know." She didn't hold his hand. She didn't say it was fine, because it wasn't, not yet. But she sat beside him in that parking lot while the world recalibrated itself around them. And that, somehow, was everything. The most devastating thing a person can do is make someone feel like a burden, when that someone spent their whole life making sure you never felt like one. Don't forget where you came from. But more than that, don't forget who carried you there.